Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to tackle some big questions today. You ever wonder if something like rent control actually works? Or who really ends up footing the bill for a new tax? Well, today we're going to peel back the layers on these economic controls. And we're going to uncover some surprising winners, some definite losers, and these hidden costs that honestly almost nobody ever talks about.
All right, let's just jump right in with a big one, a really controversial question. Should the government control apartment rents? I mean, it seems so simple, right? Shouldn't the government try to make housing more affordable? On the surface, it sounds like a total no-brainer. But as you're about to see, the economic reality, well, it's a lot more complicated than that.
Okay, so to really break this down like an economist would, we're going to need a special set of tools. Think of it like a toolkit. We need a way to actually measure who benefits from any deal. Doesn't matter if it's buying a coffee or renting an apartment, and crucially, by how much. This is how we're going to find what we call the hidden value in every single purchase.
So, first up in our toolkit, let's talk about that amazing feeling you get when you find a great deal. You know what I'm talking about, right? That feeling where you just know you got way more value than what you actually paid for. Well, guess what? There's an economic term for that.
And that term is consumer surplus. Now, this is super important. It's not just a fuzzy feeling. It's a real, measurable amount of extra benefit, that hidden value that you get from a purchase. You could almost think of it as the profit you make just by being a consumer.
Okay, let's make this super clear with a simple example, a chai tea deal. Let's say Teresa, she's really craving a chai tea and she'd be willing to pay up to $6 for it. But when she gets to the cafe, the price is only $3.50. That $2.50 difference? That's not just in her head. That is her consumer surplus. It's real, tangible value that she gets to keep.
And look, this isn't just some tiny concept that only applies to buying coffee. When you start adding up all this hidden value across an entire market, the numbers get absolutely massive. Just to give you an idea, back in 2011, it was estimated that Canadians got something like $11.5 billion in consumer surplus just from their wireless services. Billion with a B.
Now, it's not just a one-way street, of course. This whole thing works on the other side of the counter, too. So let's say that coffee shop was willing to sell that same tea for as little as maybe $2, but they sold it for the market price of $3.50. Well, that extra $1.50, that's their benefit, and economists call that producer surplus.
Okay, so we've got value for the consumer and value for the producer. So what happens when we add all of that up? When we put the consumer surplus and the producer surplus together? Well, we get something really powerful. A way to measure how well a market is actually working for all of society.
This grand total is called economic surplus. Think of it like the total size of the economic pie. And this is a really important point. When an economist talks about an efficient market, they're not talking about fairness or what's equal. Nope. Their goal is much simpler, to make that total pie of benefits as big as it can possibly be for everyone involved.
So, how do we get the biggest pie? Well, that maximum value is reached at a very specific point. It's called the competitive equilibrium. It's that sweet spot, that natural price, where the number of things suppliers want to sell perfectly matches the number of things consumers want to buy. When a market hits that point, it's running at peak efficiency.
Okay, and this is the crucial takeaway. When some kind of policy or regulation comes in and pushes a market away from that efficient sweet spot, some of that potential value, it just vanishes. Poof! It doesn't go to the buyers, it doesn't go to the sellers, it's just gone. Forever. In economics, this is called deadweight loss.
All right, our toolkit is officially assembled. We have consumer surplus, producer surplus, and this idea of deadweight loss. So now let's circle all the way back to our original question and use these powerful tools to finally analyze the real-world effects of rent control.
So, first things first, let's imagine a totally free market for apartments. You've got your demand curve, which slopes down. Pretty simple, right? The cheaper the rent, the more people want an apartment. Then you've got the supply curve, which slopes up. The higher the rent, the more landlords are willing to offer up apartments. Now, where those two lines cross, that's our equilibrium. In this example, 2,000 apartments get rented for $1,500 a month. This is our perfectly efficient starting point, where that economic pie we talked about is as big as it can be.
Okay, now the government steps in. They introduce what's called a price ceiling. In this case, it's a rent control policy that says you legally cannot charge more than $1,000 for rent. That is a full $500 below where the market naturally wanted to be.
And here's what happens next, the consequences. First, that lower price creates a shortage.
all of a sudden way more people want apartments than there are apartments available. Now, for the lucky people who do get an apartment, sure, they win. Some of the value that would have gone to the landlord, their producer surplus, gets transferred over to the tenants as consumer surplus. But you see that little triangle of lost value there? That is the deadweight loss. Those are all the deals, all the rentals that would have happened at the old price, but now just can't. That value is just gone.
So let's tally it up. Who are the winners and who are the losers? The winners, pretty clearly, are the renters who managed to snag one of those now cheaper rent-controlled apartments. The losers? Well, the landlords for sure, since they get less income. But maybe even more importantly, another group of losers is anyone who now can't find an apartment at all because of that shortage. And that deadweight loss, that's just a net loss for the whole economy. It benefits absolutely no one.
Okay, so this whole framework, thinking about winners, losers, and that lost value, it doesn't just apply to price controls. We can use the exact same logic for another really common government policy, taxes. And believe me, the results here can be just as surprising.
So let's play this out. Imagine the government puts a new $1 tax on every pack of cigarettes. And let's say they collect this tax from the sellers. So who do you think actually ends up paying most of it? Common sense might tell you the sellers pay it, right? Or maybe it's split 50-50 between the buyer and seller. Well, the economic reality is pretty shocking.
It turns out the buyer ends up paying 90 cents of that dollar. The price of a pack literally goes up by 90 cents, and the seller only ends up eating about 10 cents of the cost. This whole concept is called tax incidence, and it's a perfect example of how the person the government sends the bill to often has very little to do with who actually ends up paying.
So why on earth does that happen? The core idea here is actually pretty simple, but it's super powerful. The burden of a tax, who really pays it, always falls on whichever side of the market is less flexible or less sensitive to price changes. In the case of cigarettes, demand is what we call inelastic. A lot of smokers are going to buy them even if the price goes up a bit. Because they're the less flexible group, they're the ones who end up shouldering almost the entire tax.
And you see this in the real world all the time. Take a payroll tax like employment insurance. The law might say that employers have to pay a bigger chunk of it. But think about it. The supply of labor is also pretty inelastic. Most of us can't just decide to work 10% less if our take-home pay changes a little bit. Because of that, economic models show that it's actually the workers who bear most of the real cost, usually in the form of slightly lower wages than they would have gotten otherwise.
And all of this brings us to our final and maybe most important takeaway. And it's all about what this kind of economic analysis can tell us, and just as importantly, what it can't.
You see, here's the limit of this purely economic way of looking at the world. It is an incredibly powerful tool. It shows us the trade-offs in black and white. Here are the winners, here are the losers, and here's the value that just disappears, the deadweight loss. But what it can't do is answer the bigger normative question. Is it fair? Is helping out one group of people worth the cost to another group and to the overall efficiency of the whole system?
That final call, well, that's not really an economic decision. It's a social one, a political one. Economics is amazing because it gives us the map. It lays out all the costs and all the benefits. But it's ultimately up to us as a society to look at that map and decide which path we want to take. And now, you're just a little bit better equipped to be a part of that really important conversation.